Thanks. Thank you, Gordon, and I hope to make it at least enjoyable, if nothing else. I'm usually the one, who's standing between the audience and lunch. Today I'm not, so at least I don't have that pressure. Right, so just a quick show of hands. How many of you saw me speaking at the National Cybersecurity Community at Malta? Okay, you might, okay. There's a bunch of slides in there which are similar, but I've rejigged them, taken off a few things, put in a few things, so hopefully I'll keep even you interested. The rest, it should be hopefully entirely new. If you don't understand anything, or the audio is a bit weird, isn't it? Okay. If you don't understand anything or something, just throw something at me and I will repeat or clarify or whatever. Right, so, yes, that's me. Okay, so, you know what, let's just leave it like that. I decided to take a kind of a complementary approach to Vanessa in the sense, Vanessa went straight into the idea of kind of what quantum distribution is, why we do it, how we do it, etc., etc. I decided to take a step back and really talk about why we do cybersecurity, what the problems with cybersecurity are, specifically from the point of view of quantum. So how quantum can be a threat, and also then how quantum can be an ally that brings in quantum key distribution. And finally, what are we doing in Malta, also as regards this PRISM project. So hopefully I'll keep on time and I'll be able to hit all these points. But more important to me is to kind of have the discussion. So if there's anything interesting, just stop me and we'll discuss. The slides will distribute. You'll be able to see the links, click them, check the QR codes, etc. later on. So don't worry about the details. You'll have access to all of them. Right, so I want to start off by talking about secure communication. And really, I really want to take it down to the very, 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 very basics, because the first thing I want to talk about is why do we do secure communication? And, you know, it could just be seen as something intuitive. Yes, I should be somehow able to speak to you securely because I think so. But yeah, there is a bit more backing this up, and I found this interesting article by Anissa from a few years ago, where the link is made to human rights, particularly within the context of EU member states. And some EU member states actually have this as a constitutional guarantee that you should be able to communicate securely with, or privately, with anyone of your choosing, whether another person or an organization or a public organization. You should be able to do that. And it therefore behooves us as technologists or governments or authorities to allow this to happen, to enable this to happen. And a lot of the spirit of what we're talking about today is this. How do we enable this to happen when technologies have changed such that this right is under threat? Okay, so that's kind of my perspective on this. Now, Vanessa alluded to how we do secure communication, but very, very, very briefly. And I want to give my aspect, or my 2 cents worth of how we do secure communications. So broadly speaking, if we want to communicate securely with each other, we need to, come up with a protocol, yada, yada, yada. But basically what we need to do is we need to figure out how to send secrets to each other. And there's, broadly speaking, 2 ways of doing this, symmetric or asymmetric. Now, symmetric basically means that you and I meet at a cafe somewhere, exchange a piece of paper. On that piece of paper is written a code. I will use that code to scramble my message, garble my message, send the garbled message to you, and you can use the same code to descramble, degarble that message. Now, if someone else happens to intercept both the message and the code, all is lost. Okay, this is effectively how Enigma was broken in one sentence. There's a lot more nuance than this, but it's quite close to this. So if someone can intercept the message and the key, all else is lost. So that's kind of symmetric encryption. However, if we do it properly, it is the best possible thing in the world. If we keep our keys secure and someone just happens upon a scrambled message, they can't do anything with that. Full stop. At least under most circumstances. Asymmetric encryption alleviates some of the issues, but comes with its own problems. So with asymmetric encryption, we have 2 keys, private and public. I keep my private key to myself. I send you my public key. You can encrypt things using my public key, send them to me, and only I with my private key can decrypt them. But there are some issues around this process, which I'll talk about later, so I'm not going to dwell too much on these now. However, it does mean that you and I never need to meet up at a cafe and exchange things on a piece of paper. We can do all of this electronically. That's the huge advantage that asymmetric encryption has over symmetric encryption in this specific context. Okay, this is something to keep in mind in the back of our minds, this how we implement secure communications. just one example, the RSA algorithm for public key infrastructure, which basically implements asymmetric encryption, proceeds as I said. I create a pair of numbers. I'm always Alice in these talks. I prepare a pair of numbers, public and private. I keep the private. I send you the public. You encrypt the data with this public key, send it to me, and I decrypt with the private key. What keeps this secure is the fact that you, as an eavesdropper, cannot get the private key from the public key. If there were a way to reverse this, all would be lost. And one of my arguments going on today is that there is now a way to reverse this. So all is lost. So we need to do something about this. Okay, so this is just a kind of brief primer for those of you who don't really dabble with these things very much. And ultimately, like, if you want to keep things, keep perspective, there's vulnerabilities everywhere here. So even symmetric encryption algorithms are known to be vulnerable against some attacks, mostly hypothetical. The implementation, regardless of it being open source or not, has been shown to be fatally flawed in places, Heartbleed, for example. And ultimately, the protocol itself, the public key infrastructure itself, is vulnerable to quantum attacks. Quantum computing will break PKI. Okay, so basically every step is vulnerable to new attacks that we need to keep in mind. So what is this quantum threat to the PKI? And to really kind of address this properly, I'd like to build up from quantum computing. Even though quantum communication is not quantum computing, I want to build up from here. Now, quantum computers are a bit of a strange beast. And one of the weird things that quantum computers have is this idea of superposition. So from my perspective, any computer is basically a glorified box of switches. Might have an Apple on it, but it's basically a box of switches. And each switch can be on or off, and combinations of ons and offs give you algorithms, cat videos, memes, whatever. But it's still just switches being on or switches being off. A quantum computer, which is built of qubits, can have these bits being on or off plus on, or off minus on, whatever that even means. But this idea that you can have not just the two states off and on, but something in between, like a superposition, a mathematical superposition, which is neither one, nor the other, nor both. It's something completely different. It's kind of this that gives the quantum computers the power that they have. And I want to illustrate this with a simple example that I don't know a single use for this except for talks like this, called the Deutsch-Joja algorithm. And imagine I have a black box. The black box has one switch input and one LED output. Okay, so 1 bit input, 1 bit output. I'm asking the question, for whatever reason, are the outputs always the same, or do different inputs give different outputs? If it were a classical black box, then I would just set the switch to 0, check the output. Set the switch to 1, check the output, compare, and that gives me my answer. In a quantum black box, I would simply set the switch to 0 minus 1, whatever that means. And then, upon running the machine once, I immediately have my answer. So we've compressed 2 runs to 1. You can actually generalize this to 2 to the power of n runs to 1. And this is what we call an exponential speed up. So we can solve a problem exponentially faster, in this case, on a quantum computer. There's other algorithms which we'll deal with, which are a bit more useful than this. But this is a good way because we can really peek inside the algorithm here. Right, so superposition is strange, but it's only one of the ingredients which goes into kind of building a quantum world. The other is something called measurement or collapse. There's various words that describe the same thing. But basically, if I have this lovely qubit in this lovely 0 plus 1 state, it's lying there doing nothing. As soon as I look at it, or poke it, or measure it somehow, it will change randomly to a 0 or a 1, which makes debugging the algorithms like this impossible. You can't put a breakpoint and look at your variables, because as soon as you look at your variables, you've changed everything, and then what the hell are you going to do? So from the computer science perspective, actually, everything needs to be rethought about how we do things with quantum computers. But it does give us an interesting hook that we're going to use later on to secure our communications. Okay, so keep this idea of collapse or measurement in mind, the random collapse. It also means that building these devices is hellishly difficult. Okay, there's a lot of technological progress needed to be done in order to eliminate or get around these problems. That's not to say these are science fiction devices. I mean, quantum computers exist on a small scale. First one there is a superconducting device, very similar to any kind of chip you've used, but cooled down to absolute zero or thereabouts. Second kind of device is where you use single atoms suspended in vacuum as your computational basis. Third device there uses light as the computational basis, which is a bit strange, but all of these have quantum properties. We can use all of these to build qubits, to build our quantum devices. But this is all work in progress, but work very much in progress is what I want to emphasize. Now, going back on the idea of algorithms, quantum algorithms, if you go on, quantumalgorithmzoo.org, you'll find something like 62 known algorithms that demonstrate speed up over classical algorithms. Some are useful, some are completely useless, but there's about 62. The point is, we don't yet know what we don't know. So 62 is not a very big space. And we know that the space of addressable by quantum computers, the addressable algorithmic space, is bound to be absolutely huge. So there's a lot of this territory, a lot of the algorithms which are potentially there that we have no idea about. And this will tie into a comment which I think Noel made during his panel about PQC and vulnerability. So I'd like you to keep in mind that we do not know what we don't know when it comes to algorithms for quantum computers. Okay, but the state of the art is that we know some algorithms that speed up. One of them is Shor's algorithm, which is about 30 years old, and Shor's algorithm factors numbers efficiently. So if I give you two numbers, 3 and 5, multiply them, give me 15, that's quite a straightforward process. Things can be, you can do this quite efficiently. But if I gave you 15, it's actually harder to break that down to 3 and 5. There are ways to do this semi-efficiently, but not really efficiently. And as soon as that 15 becomes 1,000 digits long, then things really grind to a halt. At the moment, we don't know a single algorithm on classical computers that can do this efficiently. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, that's an important point, but we don't know of any. Shor's algorithm, which runs on quantum computers, is known to do this efficiently. And as soon as you get into that territory, then you can break RSA, you can break Diffie-Hellman-Merkel, you can break a lot of things on which all of our security infrastructure applies. Okay, so this is kind of the power, negative and positive, of quantum computing brought to the cyber field. And when we talk about things being faster, just to give you a sense of the orders of magnitude, let's forget about your kind of, is it 1 million years or 2 million years? Let's forget about that. Let's talk about orders of magnitude. If you take a number which is large enough and you try and factor it, it'll take you about 1 million years on an ordinary computer, a classical computer. Things have sped up since 2018, I understand, but we're still in the same order of magnitude. With some assumptions, a quantum computer running Shor would take that down to 100 seconds. Okay, that's almost a trillion-fold increase in speed. This is what we mean when there's a game changer. We go from 1 million years to 2 minutes. Okay, at that point, attacks on our cryptographic systems become not just easy, but not just possible, but easy and straightforward. Okay, so this is the breaking point. This is the thing which will break all of our cryptographic algorithms. Now, you might tell me, you've seen those devices, and those devices seem primitive. It might take some time to build a proper quantum computing, so a quantum computer. So, can we afford to wait until quantum computer is mature? No. And this is the store now, decrypt later attack, which has already been alluded to, but I want to kind of emphasize this quite a bit later. So, the point is that it is possible to skim off encrypted data, sit on it, storage is cheap. To sit on the data for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. As long as the data is still valid, then you still have value in there. And then decrypt it once you have computational power available to you, whether through a quantum computer or through some unknown classical algorithm, which would then be feasible. So today's data, this is the important thing, yesterday's data is already vulnerable to tomorrow's threat, which is not the case with many threats we face, where things are okay until we discover the threat, and it's just a question of fixing the threat. This is a retroactive threat. This is the key game changer here. It's today's data which is vulnerable against threats coming at us in the future. So how do we counter this threat? And I'm going to mention two approaches. I'll speed up a bit, particularly with post-quantum cryptography, but I'll speak about both post-quantum and quantum key distribution. So how do we counter this threat? Well, post-quantum cryptography, and I think Vanessa mentioned this and the panel mentioned this, the idea is to replace the cryptographic algorithms that we use nowadays with something quite similar in the sense that it runs on the same computers, but which is supposed to be resilient against attacks by quantum computers. Now, the problem is that we don't know what quantum attacks will be there in 5 years' time, because we don't know how many algorithms we're going to discover between now and then. So calling something quantum resistant needs an asterisk, needs a kind of a caveat saying, well, it's resistant against the tiny fraction of algorithms we know today. Okay, so for me, it's a bit, we really need to be careful about this. Furthermore, there's still no standard on PQC, although this is slowly emerging, hopefully beginning of next year. But even a lot, even the work that NIST put in, which is a lot of work, has led to some interesting situations where final stage contenders were hacked in a weekend or even an hour, I think, on an ordinary laptop. With cryptographic algorithms, what we need is heritage. We need to run things for 10 years, 15 years, before we can say this thing works and it's safe enough. We can't just say we have a threat, let's just throw something at it and replace all our cryptographic algorithms in the hope that they work. Okay, and so for me, one needs a bit of, one needs to moderate this discussion a bit. And, so what security demands must we place on these algorithms before we roll them out? And given that there is this store now, decrypt later attack, how long can we wait in order to satisfy these demands? So the first question asks us to wait. The second question asks us to go now. Okay, so for me, there are these two contradictory demands that cannot be solved by PQC by itself, which is where I feel quantum key distribution really brings in it changes the game. So how does quantum key distribution work in a couple of slides? Well, there was the idea of superposition and measurement. Remember, measurement causes things to change randomly as soon as they measured, as soon as someone observes them. Very much related to this is the idea of no cloning. So how do I make a copy of something? I make a copy of something by looking at the first thing and copying it. Now, what happens if, as soon as I look at the first thing, it changes? Well, then my copy is going to be a copy of the changed thing. So it turns out that due to the fundamental way in which the universe works, there is no way to create a perfect copy of a quantum system. So if I am using a quantum system to set up a cryptographic key exchange, any eavesdropper on that line will either get no information or will make their presence felt, and therefore we know how to take steps. And both of these scenarios, depending on the protocol, are guaranteed by the laws of the universe rather than computational complexity. Okay, so there's a bit of a game changer there as well. So there is no eavesdropping on quantum communication, which is extremely important. I just want to introduce a fourth concept because I can, because I'm a lecturer, so I'm allowed to. And that's called entanglement. Let's not go too much down the rabbit hole of what entanglement is, but it's something which, when used technologically, creates an entire game changer again. So if we have this property called entanglement, and Alice and Bob share this property, whatever it means, that means they have these quantum systems which share this property called entanglement. And we know that when they look at these quantum systems, they will get a random answer, 0 or 1. Have we established that so far? Measuring things gives yes. The thing with entanglement is that this randomness is connected between these two places. So the universe creates the same random number in two places at the same time. So the random number is not taken from one place to another. It just pops into existence in two places at once. So that gives you a way of setting up perfect security through symmetric key encryption in a way which does not allow you to meet and exchange keys on a piece of paper. So you can use the telecommunications network to set up the key and then use the key to then perform your encryption, which is weird. It sounds strange. People will resist this, but this is how the universe works. Okay, and I'm happy to kind of guide you at the literature. But if you ask me, why does the universe work this way? No one knows. Okay, we just know it does. Okay, we have very good reason to believe that this is exactly how the universe works. And this way of the universe working gives us a certificate that we can then use to certify our encryption security. Okay, so it's a very nice chain which starts with the universe itself rather than an authority, rather than computational complexity. Just to show that this is not kind of science fiction, there's thousands upon thousands of demonstrations of this. There's just one that we did between Malta and Sicily. Again, thanks to Melita. This was 5-6 years ago at this point, where we set up an entanglement link between Malta and Sicily. We exchanged light over the telecommunications network, and we showed that you could set up this kind of infrastructure even in very non-ideal conditions. I am contractually disallowed from showing you how bad the conditions were, especially in Sicily. But you know, we were very far from being in a nice, well-lit lab. Let's just put it that way. We were in a van in July in the middle of nowhere in Sicily, where even the police told us kind of beyond sunset, you know, don't count on us here. Just move, go away. So yeah, things were a bit difficult, but you know, even under those non-ideal conditions, we managed to set this up. And just because I can brag, this was part of the work that was eventually mentioned in the Nobel speech in 2022 when Anton Zeilinger, whom we worked with on this one, got the Nobel in physics. So again, we're not talking about a couple of crazy people like me saying things in the desert. You know, there's a lot of heritage, there's a lot of work going on behind what I'm talking about today, even though I can't spend too much time on the details. So how does this give us information theoretic security? I've kind of hinted at this, but maybe it bears repeating. The idea is to use quantum key distribution to create the same random number in two places at once, and simply use that number for symmetric encryption. If you do this properly using, for example, one-time pad, now no one seriously uses this, but you could. At that point, you have a system, a crypto system, which is absolutely impregnable. What do I mean by that? Regardless of whether it's me or an alien from Alpha Centauri today, a million years into the future, whatever, there is no way to break into the communications which are protected like this. Okay, so even if you skim off the data, it will remain completely useless for eternity, for the rest of the universe. Okay, so this is how we can use the laws of quantum physics to generate a crypto system which gives us information theoretic security now and forever. And this is kind of the direction we'd like to head in. Just a quick side note. There's a lot of discussion about kind of saying, should one do post-quantum or quantum key distribution? In reality, one is a software thing, one is a hardware thing. So PQC has already been deployed in this, I believe, WhatsApp and Signal. There's no guarantee, no mathematical guarantee of their security, whereas QKD is guaranteed to be secure, but it requires rethinking how we do the entire system. Nevertheless, there are ways of having the two sit on top of each other in different layers of your network stack to ensure that you get the best of both worlds, or the best kind of cryptography for the application you do. And this is kind of both at Merqury and, broadly speaking, within NATO and the European Commission. This is the point of view that many people are taking, that these are two sides of the same cryptographic coin that we must consider. Now, someone asked about kind of timelines and so on. I can't remember who it was, but someone asked that question. And there's something called Moscas theorem, which I quite like. It's a simple theorem. Don't worry about it. You know, it's not a complex thing. But it does put in mathematical terms how scared we must be. So if we take X to be, you know, how long, the timeline, the length of time over which our data must be kept safe. So with classified information, that could be 50 years, 60 years, okay? You take Y to be how long it will take to switch over to a quantum safe solution, whether it's quantum key distribution or post-quantum, which is, you know, years at least for most solutions, although what we're doing in Prism is to bring that down to months. And Z, how long it will take for a quantum computer to become available, which by most estimates nowadays is somewhere between 5 and 10 years. You'll realize that if the left-hand side is larger than the right-hand side, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble. You know, X can be several decades, Y can be several years, Z is less than a decade, approximately speaking. So we are in a situation where we are woefully unprepared for the threats which will be coming up to us very, 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 very soon. And this is something which, you know, we can't go back in the past to fix this, but at least, you know, the least we can do is start now and implement things as rapidly and as well as possible. So this is kind of where EuroQCI and Prism comes in, and I am running, very much over time. So EuroQCI has been introduced by Vanessa and I think by Gordon as well. The EuroQCI is basically an idea, a political idea by the European Commission to have, by the end of the 2020s, approximately, a Europe-wide communications grid using quantum mechanics at the underlying level so that any public entity in Europe can communicate with any other public entity in Europe using quantum security. That's the idea. How do you implement this when the technology doesn't even exist? Well, you start small. So the first phase is where each member state has been given some money, Prism is one of these projects, to implement a national testbed of some description. They're all different. Then eventually we'll start connecting these networks together. And we will start, by the end of the decade, seeing kind of an EU-wide operations. At the same time, because of technical reasons, we will need to launch satellites to enable proper EU-wide communications to do this. So we have the European Space Agency designing and launching quantum-enabled satellites in the next few years. So it's quite an exciting time to be in, and we're creating something from scratch, going to continental scale, whilst creating the technology at the same time, which is crazy, but it's a wonderful place to be in right now, at least in my opinion. So PRISM is our national project to do this. And so the idea is to build a testbed network throughout the Maltese Islands that uses this technology at the basis and serves to illustrate, let's say, key proofs of concept that this technology works in these conditions for these entities and so on and so forth. So that's the idea. These have already been discussed. So very, very briefly, our objective is to set up a quantum communications network. Technically, we want to complete the integration of quantum systems. I'm happy to talk about this a lot, but I don't have too much time. But there is some issue between kind of the devices, the technology that exists nowadays, and getting it into a point where you need zero configuration and you just plug it in. That doesn't exist yet. So we're doing a lot of that here. We want to deploy the network in Malta, create an ecosystem, technology ecosystem in Malta, and we're starting to build that even through today. But today is perhaps more about spreading the word about quantum technologies in general. So all of these are goals of our project. It's not just about building the network, it's about building the community and the ecosystem as well. And anyone who's interested in joining our testbed, please contact us, because we are still designing the network. And if we can somehow onboard you, then we will, and we will have more use cases to discuss, to report on, which can only be a good thing. So this is kind of the cartoon version of what that network would look like. It's a cartoon version because we just kind of chose points of interest without taking care to see that the fiber links exist and we can work with them and so on. But we're building something which is very similar to this at the moment. So starting from kind of the university inner harbor area and now growing throughout the country. And I mean, this is still a work in progress, but you'll start hearing more and more from us towards, let's say, January to March next year, when we'll have a few public demonstrations on parts of these networks. But yes, it's very much work in progress, so please contact us if you're interested in seeing whether we can use your organization as one of our test cases. Very briefly, how does our philosophy work? Because it bears repeating that we do things slightly different to how most people do quantum key distribution or apply quantum key distribution. So the state of the art is I have two buildings, party 1, party 2. I am computer A in party 1. You are computer E in party 2. We want to communicate securely. We use public key infrastructure, but that's vulnerable. So that thief over there, the red thief, because red is bad, right? The red thief is stealing information from the public internet, storing it, and eventually getting into it. That's the state of the art. The way we want to change the infrastructure is to sit at kind of gateway level in each building and have kind of automatically imbue the entire building on either end with quantum security when communicating with the other building. So we're sitting at that level and ensuring that the data traveling from A to E has an extra level of security given by quantum key distribution, at which point the thief can steal whatever they want to steal, but they will never ever get into the data. If you're interested more in the technicalities, come and speak to my team, because this is kind of a cartoonish version of what we're implementing. What have we done in the past 9 months? And this will be very, very fast. So we have already started building a complete software solution. So, well, 28 minutes out of 30. So way back in May, we had already set up a video call, which we demonstrated publicly between the university and one of the Melita installations in Modena, where, interestingly enough, from the kind of the geeky perspective, the video software was completely unencrypted. The software had no idea that encryption even existed, but our software stack kind of intercepted the packets, encrypted them, sent them the other way, decrypted them, sent them to the other screen, and so on. So we kind of demonstrated the alpha version of our stack way back in May already, although things have improved a lot since then. Of course, this was like the first time we went public. It doesn't show, but that's life. I think we need a light team, by the way, as well, not just a dark team. But anyway, we are one of the few organizations, I would hazard to say the only organization in the EU at least, to look at the problem of setting up quantum key distribution networks as opposed to quantum key distribution links. So we have set up both the kind of the monitoring system and everything else, the orchestration that's required to run and monitor countrywide links countrywide key distribution networks, seeing that they're working, seeing that they're doing what they're doing, etc., etc., etc. So we're very much building the entire network stack required for quantum key distribution to go mainstream. Just because people here like open source, we can't make everything open source for various reasons, but there are certain things we can, and there are certain things we can make at least source available. And we do have a few things, not very much, but slowly growing list of things on our GitHub. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, look to our GitHub to see kind of the software that we've been able to make public in that sense. And beyond that, there's also a couple of people who are present here today who are part of our newest kind of sub-team within Mercury, because the whole thing, let me rephrase, having an organization put quantum key distribution in their infrastructure at the moment means asking them to buy 30 boxes and connecting them with a bunch of different fibers and cables and hoping that everything goes well. And so we want to change that to a kind of a single appliance version, so kind of put everything in the same box, make sure it's very well protected, and so on and so forth. And this requires a bit of hardware development as well. And this is something which, as I say, stay tuned. We're still developing this, but hopefully it's somewhere around summer next year, we'll be able to start also going public on some really interesting concepts that we've been developing. So that's kind of just the first 9 months of Prism, which, for it's a 2.5 year project. So first 9 months is a lot, but there's still a lot left to come. I hope you agree with me. And with that, thank you so much for your attention. Happy to take questions or comments, criticisms, whatever.
Any questions to Bob?
Alice, I'm Alice.
You're Alice?
I'm Alice. That's what I said, I'm always Alice.
Oh, you said Bob. In fact, I was going to tell you, why not Alice?
Hello, hi. Thank you for the presentation. In the last slides, you mentioned that there is a network already, and a network is being in the test modes, and you have already performed some kind of video conferencing between the university and one of the providers. And you are also asking for participants within this network, am I right?
Okay, so there's a few things. This network was never meant to be kind of what's going to happen exactly. This is more of a cartoon.
Yeah.
We're still identifying which links can allow us to generate something like this, because we are the cutting edge of the cutting edge here, as Noel keeps saying. And what that means is we're still building the network. Now, at the same time, even though we've identified some interesting points of interest to us, after consultation, that doesn't mean that we've hit all interested organizations. So for example, in this figure, I don't think MDIA is there, but we are now working with MDIA to put one of our network nodes at MDIA to then eventually see if we can liaise with their HPC infrastructure over there. So we're looking for anyone who's got that sort of organization to see if we can have the network include their organization, either temporarily for a few weeks, maybe for a few months. But in any case, it could provide us with a lot of data, a lot of input, but likewise the organization. Yeah.
Okay, and if there is an organization and has a node which is outside the Maltese territory, can that participate also on this network, in this test network?
Okay, so that is the idea where we're going. Eventually, EU-wide is where we're going. We are through, this is one of the non-negotiable ones, that's Madlena. Through there, we're going to Sicily. Now, in Sicily, there's nothing at the moment, it just terminates there. But yes, in principle, there will be the potential to then hook up to the Italian network and kind of communicate to that network, eventually the Slovene network, the French network, and so on and so forth. So yes. Now, obviously, this would require authentication. You can't just hook up to a network, of course. But yes, in principle, that's exactly where we want to go. You're very welcome. I'm not sure. Evan? Jake's going to stay running back and forth today.
Just one question. So in your cartoon, there is some common protocol which exists already for the...
You mean this?
No.
The weird cartoon.
The green line, that green line.
No, okay, so that green line is the protocol. So for example, we have some devices from Lux Quanta. Well, they're still not with us, but they will be coming here. That protocol would be the protocol that Lux Quanta uses. If we were to buy devices from company X, they would operate on a completely different protocol. By completely different, I don't mean different version numbers. We're talking different physical characteristics. And then that's it. So they can't speak to each other. So what we're also building in our stack is a way to make sure that if I have part of my network using that protocol, that device, part of my network using that protocol, that device, there is a way for those keys to somehow be exchanged through a trusted node. But there are smart ways of doing it.
But I assume, I don't know, like the EU is trying to push for some standards or not yet?
Not at this level, because it is absolutely unclear if there's going to be like the standard or the protocol, because some work better in short distances, some work better long distances, some are better for clean lines, some are better for noisy lines. It really, really matters. It depends. And I think that will also impinge on market distortion, because if you have companies that have built, like 3 or 4 or 5 completely different protocols, then the authorities can't come in and say, I'm going to use that protocol. But from our perspective, it doesn't matter, because we sit on top of all of that and we enable that to work better.
So just one question on maybe more related to physics. So in quantum networking or quantum communications, you don't have problems which are in quantum computing, like the coherence or something that I would assume there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So those manifest themselves. So you mentioned decoherence, but there's others. But that's the big one. Those problems manifest themselves as a degradation in your key generation rate. So you expect that I and you, being a meter apart, should be able to send a megabit of keys, but we're saying 100 kilobits because we're getting decoherence. Now, the smart part is distinguishing decoherence, natural decoherence, from an eavesdropper, because it can look very, very, very similar. And then there's error correction mechanisms and things like that which eliminate the effects of either. But yeah, you do come across similar problems. Yeah.
But you don't need a 0K.
No, it's light. For light, we're sending light, and for light, everything is at 0 Kelvin. So
okay,
that's a good thing here.
I'm noticing that you're, like this, we're doing encryption from site to site.
Yeah.
We're not doing encryption end to end. Would the end best case scenario be a quantum key distribution hardware as part of the network card?
Yes. So this is kind of what makes sense given the economies of the moment and given the state of technology, in the sense that even this is horrendously complicated to do at the moment. And I think that's a necessary first step. So the philosophy, and you might disagree with it, but the philosophy is, I'm not here to do cybersecurity at the level of teaching your grandmother not to put a pen drive on a computer. So I'm assuming that there are physical mechanisms for protecting your building. Which, yeah, we can argue whether that should be the case.
Mostly about compliance. I'm talking mostly about compliance, and maybe that thought of compliance needs to advance together with this, that we don't need end-to-end, or we do need end-to-end, and the hardware needs to get there, you know?
Yeah, if you could get the hardware there, fantastic. But like in the intermediate step, what we can do basically as a community, as QKD, is the simplest way of explaining it is the following. I am happy with the physical security within my perimeter.
Yeah.
You are happy with the physical security within your perimeter. We're extending those perimeters so that they meet in the middle. And at that point, we have one secure perimeter encompassing both buildings. This is what that gives you at the moment. Then if you could go down to the end user, fantastic. That blows up the market, and it will be very good for us. But at the moment, given the underlying technology, it'll take a bit longer to get there.
Couldn't you use post-quantum cryptography internally on a LAN? Basically, we're talking LAN versus WAN here. So a WAN, you're using hardware, a LAN, you're using software, and have a bit of a hybrid.
Absolutely. That's why I had that slide saying both solutions should be there. So that's one way of interpreting it. The other side of it is not everyone is keen on changing anything in their infrastructure. So you might have a situation where an entity, for example a bank, which is heavily regulated, says, I cannot change a single piece of software or hardware within my secure perimeter. So what we're doing then comes in, and we just take the data that's about to leave the building and give it a quantum cloak. Maybe post-quantum as well, if you really wish to be paranoid. So at that point, you don't need to change anything at all within that infrastructure. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis, and that's why we're speaking with banks, we're speaking with Meta, because every entity has its own risk profile, every entity has its own desires. But yes, sorry.
And if I can add, like many other technologies, the regulation will come after the technology, so it will only catch up at a later stage. So we are not driven by the regulation at this point in time.
The trick is to make sure that we don't fall foul of the regulations as well. So it's a very
yes.
It's a very fine line, though. Yeah.
But the augmentation approach that you were mentioning I mean, is the reality, because there are commercial, operational, pragmatic issues to handle. I mean, the theory is yes, have it at the network card, and that's it. We don't need to do anything else. Forget about the pen drive.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we're still talking of pen drives today. So
yes. So. But there are two different problems. I hear we're talking about infrastructural security.
That's why we need to be talking of augmented.
Yeah. Good question.
Any other questions? Going once, twice, three times?
Matthew.
Sorry, Matthew. Sorry, I didn't see you.
If I can add to the previous comment quite shortly, is that there are legislations being carried out on cybersecurity, which is an EU-wide approach. We're just talking about mainly the NIS directive, the Network Information Systems Directive, which is Malta, where we have the transposed under Legal Notice 16/2018 for what we call the finance operators for essential services. Still, it does not stop your grandmother opening, so it's targeting purely critical infrastructures, basically. Now we're drafting the second version of it, so already out version 2 iteration. So we think that by October 2024, we're going to have, actually the directive states that by October 2024, it'll be enforceable. We're looking into the how it can work within the Maltese legal framework and legal system, which is not a trivial matter, because then we're talking about how enforceability works within Malta, which is an entire can of worms, which I don't want even to again enter into. But within principle, we already have a legislation for a number of years in Malta on cybersecurity of critical infrastructures, which now we define them as operator of essential services, because the definition is a bit different. And there's a wider scope, because critical infrastructures only covers transport and energy sectors. Operator of essential services, then you have your medical, your IXPs, top-level domains, so it's really an entire coverage of them. Having said that, there's also a new directive that's been transposed with similar timelines called the SIR directive. So the SIR directive is more focused on physical security. So it again defines what are critical entities. Now it's an offshoot of critical infrastructures. And as well, we're talking about the physical security. We're talking about insider threat and insider risk assessment. So the legal aspect, thanks to the European Parliament, is going to be handled. Now the matter is how it's going to be implemented and enforced within Malta, which is really not a trivial matter. That is, in a way, is being covered. Now, actually, going to the details, what are their main risks in Malta, is an entire different discussion. But I'll stop there. So, thank you.
Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. One last question. Let me go ahead and.
Thank you. My question is on the legal aspect of quantum. So what we're creating here is encryption that is basically unbreakable. So from a law enforcement perspective, obviously one of the difficulties facing law enforcement, especially today, from a cybersecurity perspective, is the availability of obtaining the data as evidence in a crime. What we're creating here is unbreakable encryption, which means law enforcement is basically, their hands are cut off, because now not only will they struggle to obtain access to gain the evidence, but that evidence is practically unbreakable and unencryptable. So how, and a sub-question to that is, the bad guys are going to be in the same position to apply quantum encryption. So their communications is basically going to be unbreakable. So whilst this is a positive, it is also creating a mirror that cybercrime is actually going to benefit even more from than they are today with the current technologies. How do you...
I was called somewhere. No, it is an enormously difficult question. I was looking at Jamie because yesterday we had a meeting with kind of our European counterparts, and they asked exactly the same question, kind of, because there still isn't an answer about this, the lawful interception in particular. There are ways of managing the threat. So yes, the link encryption can be made absolutely bulletproof, but ultimately, is that the vector that law enforcement usually uses, or are there other vectors? As regards bad guys versus good guys, I mean, ultimately we're trying to counteract what I think is a bigger threat, in the sense, once quantum computing becomes available, then that's it. We have, our pants are down, full stop. And at that point, it's not just bona fide, do-gooders who's going to have access to these kind of technologies. So we need to, face facts that, we're also screwed the other way as well. So from my perspective, it is kind of the one way we have at the moment, one technology we know about that can guard us against that threat. But it doesn't mean that, we just give the technology away for everyone to use willy-nilly. There are safeguards, there are things we can do. Ultimately, even standard encryption used by military is not something that you can buy off the shelf, and there's traceability there, even though it's software. So there are mechanisms, there are ploys, there are legal mechanisms in place to at least contain the danger. And from my understanding, but I am not an expert by a mile, lawful interception takes place at different places in the value chain, in the tool chain, which would probably not be affected by this, maybe on purpose. That's it.